Free at last, Prince Fratelli was finally making his getaway, escaping his jail cell. Blaring alarms sounded as cars chased Francis out of the. Francis was met outside by his brother Jake and his mother. They jumped into their car. Jake leaned out the window and poured a stream of gasoline onto the road. Then Mama Fratelli dropped her lighted cigarette onto it. Boom, boom, boom. A wall of fire rose up between the guards and the Fratellis. The chase was on. 2 police cars were in hot pursuit of the Fratellis gang's off-road vehicle. Mama Fratelli smiled wickedly, sat at the wheel. Cars' speedometer were past 100 miles per hour. Mama was frenzied. Goal was to lose the cause, no matter what. The cars whizzed along the Goonies' hometown of Story. Mama made a quick turn and careened through the grassy field of the high school football team. A group of high school cheerleaders practiced the tune of "Better Be Good for Her to Me." Shots went. Bullets ripped through the side of the four. The cars whizzed past the hillside country club and headed for the. Mama checked her rear. The police were closing in. She turned to her sons and shouted, "Duck down." Jake and Francis dove for the floor. Mama pulled on a black helmet, pushing down its visor to mask her face. Mama made a sudden turn to Main Street. A crowd of people gathered to view the Astoria off the race. 40 vehicles were lined up at the starting line. All of their drivers wore helmets, their dark face visors pulled down. Mama pulled her car into the lineup. The starting flag was waved and the race was on. Mama's off-road vehicle became in the face of a crowd of similar black four-wheelers. Fratelli boys looked back at the cops and laughed devilishly. Only one Goonie had witnessed the chase. Lawrence Chunk Cohen. Chunk was a pudgy, clumsy 14-year-old who often made up fabulous lies to get attention. He saw the chase as it was reflected in the screen of the video game he was playing. Startled, he spilled his milkshake over his shirt and dropped his pizza. As he caught sight of the bullet holes on the side of the Fratelli car, he gave a low whistle. "Would you look at that?" under his breath. "Nothing ever exciting happens around here anyway," Mikey Walsh, to his older brother Brand. "He's the Goondocks. I can't wait to move." Brand was hanging upside down from the chinning bar. "Really?" he asked. "No, I don't really mean it," he sighed. "I was just trying to make myself feel better." "I know how you feel, Wimp. I sure am going to miss this place." The allergic Mikey gave himself a shot of asthma spray and gazed with admiration at his old brother. Brand was a handsome, muscular 16-year-old. Just then, Clark Mouth Devereaux burst in on the twosome. Clark quickly picked up the feeling of air. "What's this?" he shouted. "Finkelstein's funeral parlor? Come on, dudes. This is our last Goonie weekend." Before Brand or Mikey could answer, the gate bell sounded. "Let me in," shouted Chunk. "Jerk alert," Mouth screamed. "Hey guys, I just saw the most amazing thing." "Before we let you in, you'd better do the truffle shuffle," commanded Mouth. Chunk sighed, lifted up his shirt, exposed his pudgy middle, and began to twist and shout and shake. Mouth roared with laughter. Mikey, who was not amused, ran to the window, opened it, and dropped a stone. Stone hit a strategically placed shovel, triggering a fantastic chain of events that opened the gate for Chunk. You guys should have seen it. Chunk. Cop cars chasing this four-wheel deal. It was the most amazing thing I ever saw. More amazing than the time Michael Jackson came over to your house to use the bathroom? Mikey asked. More amazing than the time you ate in Straw Hat Pizza? Added. Honest, you guys. This time it's for real. Chunk. But it was hard to believe. It's past fibbing, something he could not easily overcome. Mikey heard the James Bond theme outside, and Mikey, it was a signal. He walked to the window and opened it. Within a few seconds, Ricky, Data, Wing arrived, propelled by a contraption he invented himself. Data's arrival was an event that sent Mikey, Brand, and Chunk colliding and falling into one another. Any of you guys ever heard of Detroit? Data asked. Well, that's where we're heading when we lose our house tomorrow. Mikey said, shut up about that stuff. It'll never happen. My dad will fix it. Brand, who knew better, said, not unless he gets his next 400 paychecks by tomorrow afternoon. Brand led everyone to the window, pointed to 3 men in leisure suits, looking at Mikey's house. The Goonies watched sadly, knowing only too well the meaning behind the scene they were observing. Mr. Perkins, one of the group, was buying up every house in the Goondocks. He then planned to total the entire neighborhood and build a golf course. This is war, Data fumed. Go on, Mikey. Open that window. I'll get him. I got all my special 007 assault options all rigged. Data opened his jacket and removed his cassette player. Inside Data's shirt was a special device. Data pulled a cord and 2 rubber-tipped darts flew out of the sides of his eyeglasses. Unfortunately, the darts malfunctioned and opened up attached to the window. Pinchers of peril, Data screamed angrily. Cool it, 00 negative, Mouth insisted. Yeah, Data, none of your stuff ever works anyway, said Mikey. Mikey and Brand's mother arrived home with the housekeeper. Boys, Mrs. Walsh said, this is Rosalita. Because of my accident with the spin dryer, Rosalita's here to help with the packing. Mrs. Walsh continued. Rosalita doesn't speak a word of English. I know some of you have taken Spanish in school. I speak perfect Spanish, Mrs. Walsh, Mouth said. Then come with us, Clark, on a tour of the house and explain things to Rosalita. When Mouth returned from the tour of the house, Mrs. Walsh took Rosalita with her to shop for groceries. Mouth turned to Mikey. Why doesn't your father like anybody up in the attic? He asked. It's not his stuff up there, said Mikey. He's got to give it back to the museum. Let's go up and see if there's anything we can take for our parents, suggested. Yeah, cool. Let's do it. Everybody ran off, leaving Mikey behind to protest in vain. The Goonies ran to the attic. Mikey followed reluctantly. Brand was the first to enter through a trap door in the floor. Mouse said, I can't believe something as cool is in your house. Yeah, said Chunk. We only keep old Christmas decorations in our attic. Suddenly, there was a thunder crack. Then a flash of lightning hit the sky. Okay, Mikey said. You guys saw it. Let's get out of here. Matter, Brand taunted. Scared again? Yeah, just like you in the elevator, Mikey snapped. Brand grabbed his brother in a tight headlock and threatened, You shut up about the elevator. You understand? Huh? Mikey nodded, wheezing. Brand released him, while Mikey lay on the floor. He led the others on a trek through the attic. Mouth and Data found large pirate hats with feathers. Brand grabbed a sword. Chunk put on a pirate coat and scarf. Just think of it, exclaimed Data. All this stuff belonged to guys who walked on the same ground that we do, swimming in the same ocean, the same air. They had to breathe the herring factory air too, Chunk asked. Nah, they didn't have herring then. This was right after Christopher Columbus, the 16th century. They only had ships. 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 They were adventure guys and explorers who made maps, captured Indians, and spent all their time killing each other with swords. Mikey spotted something that caught his interest, an old map. He wished he could read it, but it was covered by a yellow, dusty piece of glass. He knew there was only one way to decipher the faded writing, break the glass, but he could not bring himself to do it. Mikey noticed Chunk struggling to remove his foot from a paint can. He smiled to himself as he held out the map. Hey, Chunk, hold this for me. Chunk nodded and took the map from Mikey. It was only a matter of minutes before Chunk lost his balance and dropped the map. Mikey, pretending to be angry, shouted, Can't you do anything right? Chunk struggled, embarrassed. Mikey picked the map from the rubble and easily slid it out of its frame. With it came a small gold doubloon. Mikey was fascinated by the map. He noticed the Spanish writing, intricate drawing of a coastline, and a mountainous cliff. Below it, with a large X. Mikey stared at the signature on the map. One-eyed Willie. Suddenly, Brand grabbed the map from his hands. The other Goonies gathered round. Mouth translated a Spanish phrase. The intruders beware, crushing death and greed, soaked with blood of the trespassing thief. Data shrugged and said, that map's old news. Everybody and his grandfather went after One-Eyed Willie's riches years ago, and nobody ever found nothing. But what if this leads to One-Eyed Willie's rich stuff? Like he asked. Before anyone could answer, Brand interrupted. Take off all that junk. My mom's back. Goonies quickly removed the pirate clothing they were wearing and rushed downstairs to answer the front door. Mr. Perkins and his cronies rode outside. Hello, little guys, said Mr. Perkins, who had the nasty habit of talking to kids as if they were infants. Brand said, my dad's not here. Is Mommy home? Asked Mr. Perkins. Brand, bristling at this remark, answered, no, sir, she's out at the market buying Pampers for all us kids. Well, Mr. Perkins said with a false laugh, give these papers to your father to read over and sign. Somebody from my office will pick them up. Mikey said, if I find One-Eyed Willie's treasure, I'd pay all Dad's bills. Maybe he could get to sleep at night, instead of sitting up trying to figure out a way for us to stay here. Boys agreed, but fell into silence. Brand broke the gloom by pulling Mikey by the hair in a gesture of playful protectiveness. Then Brand turned and left the group for a workout in his exercise area. Mikey, after making sure that Brand was out of sight, sneakily removed the map from under his shirt. As he unfolded it, the other Goonies gathered around to study One-Eyed Willie's chart. Mikey, Chunk, Mouth, and Data playing marbles. Brand pulled a metal spring chest exerciser across his chest. Exercise room was quiet. Mouth gave a nod to his marble-playing friends. They nodded back. Mikey gathered his marbles. Chunk, Mouth, and Data snuck behind Brand. They quickly grabbed the chest exerciser out of Brand's hands and wrapped it around his chest and arms. Brand was trapped. Hey, wait, let me out. The group ran outside, ignoring Brand's screams. As a safeguard, they let the air out of Brand's bicycle tires before jumping on their own bikes and pedaling away. The Goonies ended up at the Stop and Snack, a local teenage hangout. Chunk gobbled Twinkies. Data fiddled with a broken cash register, trying to repair it for the checkout lady. Mouth thumbed through some magazines. Mikey ran over to Mouth. What if they start tearing down our houses? Easy, dude. Your folks handle this. Mikey didn't answer Mouth, for he was distracted by a tourist map, which he had noticed on the lower shelf of the magazines. Mikey sat himself down on the floor and laid the local tourist map next to the treasure map. As he compared the two, he was sure that the coastline paths of both maps were identical. Wow! Jerk alert, Mouth shouted, pointing to the entrance of the store. Troy Perkins, 17-year-old son of Mr. Perkins, strutted in. Troy were Andy Carmichael and her best friend, Steph Steinbrenner. Andy was the cutest girl in town. She wore Troy's white leather sweater, cheerleader's uniform. Troy walked straight to the magazine rack and grabbed Mouth's magazine. Troy noticed Mikey's map and realized that it was important to him. Grabbed it too. Let go, shouted Mikey. That's art you're messing with. Troy held the map above Mikey's head. Then he rolled the precious parchment as if it were a cigarette. Much to Mikey's horror, Troy lit the map with a butane lighter and took a long puff. Mouse stepped forward with an insult aimed at Troy's mother. Troy exploded at Mouse's remark and leaped at him. Troy's hands dropped the map as his fists threw wild punches. Mikey quickly stomped out the fire. Then he rushed to the aid of his friend. While Troy threw punches at Mouth, Mikey leaped onto Troy. Mikey tugged at Troy until he released Mouth. Troy whirled around, snarling with rage. He made a huge fist and pulled back, ready to punch Mikey when Brand suddenly jerked Troy's hand back. Nobody hits my brother except me, Brand shouted in a threatening voice. Mikey spun around and discovered that Brand had gotten free. He knew he hadn't heard the end of that subject. Brand grabbed Troy by the shirt, ready to fight. Troy was scared. Forcing a cocky grin, he looked at the Goonies and said, "Can't wait until Monday. My dad kicks you all out on the street." He chuckled and turned to Andy. Said, "I'll be outside." Then he strutted out of the shop and snack and headed for his shiny red convertible. Mikey carefully unrolled the map and breathed a sigh of relief. He discovered only its edges were singed. Brand grabbed the map and tucked it into his back pocket. He looked at his little brother and said, "Mom's waiting for you. You just blew your whole life, pal. You know you weren't supposed to leave the house." Mouse started to sing. "Here's to good friends. Tonight is a special, kind of special." As the song continued, Mouth managed to use his free hand to remove the map from Brand's pocket. All at once, the Goonies made a run for it. Mouth, Mikey, Data, and Chunk ran outside with Brand in hot pursuit. 4 boys were able to jump on their bikes and race off before Brand could catch them. Mikey and his friends rode along the coastal road. They looked back often to check whether Brand was behind them. Around one of the bends, 3 tall, narrow rocks rose from the ocean in a pattern. Mikey thought, "I know this place. It's important." Mikey motioned to his friends and told them to stop. He took out the map and led them across the bridge onto a rocky breach. He assured Chunk, Data, and Mouth he knew where he was headed. When he took the gold coin out of his pocket, Mikey was able to use the notches in the coin as clues. Mikey said, "See this? Here's where we are now." Mikey excitedly pointed to the map, then suddenly became puzzled, for the map seemed to end. Fortunately, he was smart enough to fold it like a Mad Magazine back cover, and the folded sections formed a second map. Mikey pointed to an X on the map and announced, "This is where the rich stuff's buried, down there someplace." Both translated a Spanish phrase written beside the line of the footprints sketched on the map. 6 times 5 stretching feet, the lowest point, get the treat. 6 times 5, that's 30, said. "Stretching feet. Stretch when you walk," Data said. "I got it," Mikey shouted. "You walk 30 paces, lowest point, get the treat." Chunk was nervous. "I don't know, it's getting late. My mom's gonna be worried. Besides, if we walk down to the creepy restaurant, what's that place doing open in the fall?" He could suddenly notice a dark car pulling into the restaurant's driveway. 2 tall men climbed out and entered the shadowy building. "See? 2 customers," Data said. Chunk was still nervous. Mikey asked, "Hey Data, did you bring your binoculars?" Data fumbled underneath his shirt for the corner of his binoculars, pulled it, and screamed, "Spy eyes!" Binoculars rose from the contraption on Data's chest, but of course, they did not work as planned. Data tried to look through them. The glasses flew from his nose and shot up forward. Data struggled and shrugged. Mikey convinced his friends to follow him toward the restaurant. The place is obviously open for business. We can pretend we're coming in for something to eat. Goonies walked through an eerie graveyard toward the lighthouse lounge. Suddenly a loud cracking noise rang out, followed by another and another. The boys froze. "Gunshots," Chunk said. Mikey was annoyed. "Gunshots, jeez. Chunk, turn off your brain. Somebody probably dropped a pot in the kitchen." Mikey continued to move forward. The gang followed cautiously, eyes darting in every direction. Finally, they reached the restaurant. Mikey, Data, and Mouth peered through the filthy windows. The restaurant was dark and dusty. It appeared deserted. Nothing moved except a woman and 2 men who were dragging 2 long, heavy objects into a back room. Chunk was investigating the garage. He pushed on the door and it flew open. Rays from the setting sun reflected off a black vehicle riddled with bullet holes. Chunk yelped and ran to tell the others. By the time Chunk reached the Goonies, they were already inside the restaurant. Tugged on their clothing. "Gotta get out of here. Just saw the crash." The door slammed and the Goonies jumped. A shadowy figure stood by the restaurant door. Menacingly, a person stepped into the light. It was Mama Fratelli, and only Chunk knew who she was. Mama called to the back room, "Jake, we got customers." Jake poked his head out. What do you mean, customers? Then Jake caught sight of the kids. Warm up the stove, Mama ordered. He sat at a wobbly, filthy, sticky table set with yellow dishes and rusty silverware. Chunk tried to explain to his friends about the Fratellis, but he was so excited only air came out. Mama announced, "We've got a specialized menu here. We serve one thing, fresh fish surprise." "What kind of fish?" Chunk asked. Mama slammed her hand on the table. "I said it's a surprise." Okay, I'll take it," Chunk stammered. "Just water for me," Mikey said nervously. Mouth, with a forced Italian accent, ordered, "I like the antipasto salad, the fettuccine alfredo, the veal scallopini, and—" Angrily, Mama leaned toward Mouth and grabbed his tongue. She removed a knife from her pocket and put the blade against Mouth's tongue. "Got one more thing on the menu," she said. "Tongue." With a menacing grin, she added, "You boys like tongue?" Terrified, the Goonies shook their heads. Mama released Mouth's tongue and walked into the kitchen. Mikey got up and used Mama's absence to search for a trapdoor, anything that might lead to the buried treasure. Goonies could hear Mama and Jake arguing in the kitchen. Beta asked, "What about those two guys who came in before us? What happened to them?" Chunk, who was finally able to talk, said, "Guys, if we don't get out of here now, garage, four-wheel drive, bullet holes the size of Big Macs." Mouth interrupted, "Chunk, I'm getting really tired of all your stories." Suddenly, after some loud, frightening sounds, Francis Fratelli stormed into the dining room. He was screaming, boiling mad. "How am I supposed to finish up downstairs?" Francis stopped when he saw the boys. Looking as if he were caught doing something wrong, he dashed back through the door and locked it behind him. Mama returned, carrying water glasses filled with rusty liquid. Jake followed, clunked down a huge steaming pot filled with fish heads, bones, and black liquid. "Fish surprise anyone?" He smirked. "Yummy," Chunk said, barely veiling his disgust. Mama checked the pot. "Jake, feed your brother." "I fed it last night," Jake answered. "Let Francis, I hate going down there." Mama pushed Jake. "Francis is busy. Now get going." Reluctantly, Jake carried the pot through a crooked wooden door and disappeared into the darkness. "Excuse me, ma'am," Mikey addressed Mama. "Where's the men's room?" Mama glared at Mikey. "Can't you hold it, boy?" Mouth devilishly poured a thin, noisy stream of liquid from one glass to another. "Please," he begged. "Downstairs," Mama growled. "To your right, and stay to your right." "Mikey, don't," Chunk pleaded. Ignoring Chunk's warning, Mikey walked down the narrow flight of creaking basement steps. He found himself in a long hallway. Mikey took out his map to help him figure out where he was. Weird sounds, growling, screaming, grunting, came from the opposite side of the hallway. Mikey found those frightening noises and realized they were coming from behind a thick wooden door. When he peered inside a tiny crack, Mikey was shocked at the sight. Jake, holding the stew pot, standing over an enormous hulk. "Here, boy, you hungry? Want your supper?" Jake dangled the pot inches from the creature's outstretched fingers. Then on purpose he dropped the pot. The creature went. "Sorry, fella. Maybe tomorrow night," said Jake. Mikey took one last terrified look at the creature, then sprinted off down the hallway, back up the stairs. Mikey rushed into the dining room and collided head-on with Brand. "That's too good for you," Brand shouted. "I'm saving you for Mom." "Can we go now, you guys?" Chunk asked. "I think I'm gonna be sick." Mama walked back into the room, startling Brand. Anxious to be rid of the boys, she said, "It's all right, boys. Go on home. It's all in the house." Relieved, the Goonies fled. Mama turned the closed sign facing out. Goonies hid in the graveyard. Mikey tried to explain what he saw in the basement. They got a giant it, and they got it chained to a wall. "Look at here. Look at there," Chunk said, pointing toward the garage. Tellys had jammed one large bag in a hidden compartment in the four-wheeler and were attempting to load another. They gave up, and Jake and Francis carried the second bag back into the restaurant. When they returned, Mama drove off. Hey, the place is ours, Mikey said. Chunk was terrified. Our parents are going to be worried. Let's go home. Mikey quickly answered, What home? It's our time. Our last time to see if the treasure's buried someplace in there. Mikey pulled the map from his pocket and tried to read it. Darkness made reading impossible. Anybody got a match? Asked. Two small flames suddenly appeared, held by Andy and Steph. We ditched Troy and followed you, he explained. Mikey, with the aid of the matches and the map, led everybody back to the front door of the restaurant. The door was locked, but Chunk rammed it. Wham! We gotta get to the lowest spot, Mikey said, consulting the map. Broke away and opened the basement door. Steph heard the low growling sound first. That's it, Mikey said. Wanna see it? No way, everybody answered. Don't worry, said Mikey. It's chained up. Mikey slowly reached out and grabbed the doorknob all at once with an enormous growl. Goonies screamed and jumped aback. They tumbled into one another and into Brand and Andy, who were in the next room. Creatures on its feet, but everyone else was on the floor. The Goonies stood up and looked around. They were in a large room, equipped with a giant freezer, large sinks, a water cooler, a stove, and a stone fireplace. A metal printing press stood by a stone window. Chunk headed straight for the water cooler. On his way, he touched the precious gold coin that he pocketed after the mad scramble on the floor. Guess this is as good a place as any to start digging, Mikey announced, pointing to a spot in the center of the floor. Mikey smashed a fireplace poker against the concrete floor, but it didn't make a dent. Brand shook his head. Come on, Mikey. You're embarrassing me. Nothing buried under here. I know how to get through the cement, Mouthput said. Put Hershey syrup all over the floor and let Chunk eat through it. Chunk raised his head from the faucet. Oh, that's all I can stand. I can't stand no more. Chunk's sudden movement caused the cooler to fall off its base and smash to the floor. Water flooded the concrete and trickled into the fireplace. Mikey paused. Listen, whispered. Deep. There must be some kind of opening or passageway. Brand was annoyed at his brother, but intrigued at the idea of discovering a tunnel. Brand kicked away the burning logs, pried the grating loose, then began stomping at the bricks of the fireplace floor. He kicked so furiously, his legs shot through the floor. Mikey was right. There was an opening. A loud noise rocked the room. Data turned on the printing press. A fresh sheet of perfectly printed counterfeit $50 bills slipped out of the machine. Hey guys, check this out, Data said. Bogus bills. I knew these people were ozone, Mikey said. Chunk, who had been trying to figure out how to open the freezer, shouted, See? You guys never believed me. And now look what you got yourselves into. Suddenly the freezer handle snapped. The freezer door flew open, and there stood a corpse, an FBI badge pinned to the lapel of his dark suit. The body fell forward and hit the floor. All the Goonies dashed from the room. The kids ran down the hallway and started up the stairs. The familiar voices of Mom, Jake, and Francis made them sprint back to the counterfeit room. Tellys had returned. What do we do? They asked. Put the body back in the freezer, Mikey answered. Goonies rushed over to where Chunk was already lifting the body. They managed to lift the man to his feet and shove him back in the freezer. Fortunately, Chunk didn't get out of the way quickly enough, and he too was pushed inside. Chunk shivered with cold and fear. He was trapped eye to eye with a frozen corpse. Mikey motioned for everyone to crawl into the dark fire passageway. Brand hesitated, peering into the darkness. Geez, looks kind of small, he said. Oh yeah? Elevator, remember? He said. I told you to shut up about that. Mom and her boys were right outside the door. Brand quickly crawled inside. Mikey followed and managed to pull the grating back into place just as the Fratellis entered. Jake moved to open the freezer door. Mama noticed the broken water cooler. She knew things were not as she left them. Let's go check your brother, she said. He better not have busted his chains again. I ain't going back to the zoo for another set. Chunk slowly opened the freezer door, dashed to the fireplace. Let me in! Let me in! He pleaded. Mikey whispered, No, gotta get out. Get the police. Chunk heard the Fratellis returning. Surprising grace, he leaped over the press and crawled out of the window a split second before they re-entered the room. I knew he couldn't break those chains, Mama snarled. Maybe it was one of them tremors, Ma, Jake suggested. Mama shrugged. Let's take care of the other body. The Goonies descended into a pitch-dark, man-made passageway. Frightened, they huddled together. I saw my first dead body, Andy whimpered. Gotta look for a way out, Brand said. Data, you got any light on you? Mikey asked. Yeah, Data answered as he reached inside his shirt. He pulled a cord and shouted, Holy blinders! 2 blinding lamps momentarily flashed from Data's hips, then fizzled out. Data shrugged. Only problem, batteries don't live long. Data reached into his backpack and continued. So I have my father's backyard light. Brand grabbed it. I'll walk ahead, he said. Walk, mouth. What about run? Chunk headed for the road toward town. Suddenly he was blinded by a pair of bright headlights. He waved his arms and a car stopped. A man stepped from the vehicle. Chunk could barely see him, but he heard him ask, Is there something wrong? Chunk answered in panic. I need a ride. My friends and I just had a run-in with these really gross people, the Fratellis. We found their hideout. You could give me a ride to the police station. The man motioned to Chunk. Walking past the blinding headlights, Chunk could finally see the car. It was the same black off-road vehicle riddled with bullet holes that he had seen at the Fratellis. Chunk turned white. Big Fratelli grabbed Chunk around the waist and dragged him, screaming, to the rear of the vehicle. Once again, Chunk found himself face to face with a corpse. Brand led the Goonies deeper into the dark tunnel. Shafts of dusty light dimly lit the cavern. Overhead, metal pipes dangled from the low ceiling. Steph nudged Mouth. Your dad's a plumber. What are those pipes? Gas, sewage, water. Water pipes? Think if we started banging on them, somebody upstairs might hear? He asked. Mouth nodded and started to rap on a pipe. Others picked up rocks and joined in. Mikey crazily banged out a beat. Andy swung from the pipes like a gymnast. Brand hung upside down. Soon the pipes were twisted and tangled. What the Goonies didn't know was that they were directly under Hillside Country Club. Above them, 3 fat Hillside members were showering. Suddenly, their water faucets were sucked into the wall. Shocked, the men stared in confusion. Abruptly, filthy water exploded from the holes in the tile, drenching the men. By the tennis court, a player paused to drink from the fountain. As he stopped to take a gulp, the entire fountain sank several inches. Confused, the player bent lower. The fountain shot upward, smashing him in the chin and knocking him out. In the tunnel, the pipes had assumed lives of their own, spraying water and bouncing as if they were a part of some wild carnival ride. The steam hissed loudly. The pipes churned crazily. Burst pressure. Let's get out of here, Mouse screamed. In the Fratelli basement, Jake held a gun to Chunk's forehead. Chunk, tied to a chair with an extension cord, sweated nervously as he watched eggplant being crushed in a blender. Mama spoke. First we'll start with your pudgy little fingers, then your round little hands, then your fleshy arm. Now you gonna tell me where your little friends are? Immediately Chunk answered, In the fireplace. Don't lie to me, boy, he said. Honest, said Chunk. Got this map from Mikey's dad. He said that underneath this place there's buried treasure. Jake grabbed Chunk and shook him. Enough stories. We want the truth. Tell us everything. Everything. Chunk babbled hysterically. Okay, in 3rd grade I cheated on my history exam. In 4th grade I stole my uncle's toupee and glued it on my face when I played one of the wise men in our Christmas play. Chunk rambled. The Fratellis just looked at each other. Frightened Goonies ventured deeper into the passageway. Suddenly, Andy screamed, Ah! A decayed skeleton crushed under a gigantic boulder. Mikey looked up. A row of enormous boulders hung from chains on the ceiling. The skeleton had been the victim of a horrible trap. Mikey spoke, mostly to himself. You did this one-eyed Willie, didn't you? This is one of your tricks. You wouldn't have gone to all this trouble unless you were hiding something, would you? Goonies examined the skeleton. By its clothing and equipment, they decided the man was once a miner. Ada thought for sure he was Chester Copperpot. He was an expert, and look what happened to him. What can we expect? Ada asked. He then spread dozens of small red caps around the ground. Booby traps, he explained, to be able to hear if somebody's following. Mikey took a medallion from the skeleton's neck and examined it closely. It's an ancient copper pendant shaped like a skull. Mikey carefully compared the medallion's holes and markings with clues on the map. Ada removed several road flares from the skeleton's backpack. In his haste, he failed to notice that one of the flares was actually a stick of dynamite. All of a sudden, Andy lost control. Let's get out of here. Let's keep moving, she shouted frantically, backing away from the gruesome skeleton. Andy raced off down the tunnel. Mikey shouted, Stop, Andy, but it was too late. Andy's foot snatched on a branch. An enormous creaking echoed through the tunnel, and the boulders began to waver and roll. Everyone panicked. Dashing forward, they snapped branch after branch as they attempted to retreat. Boulders crashed and tumbled behind them. Goonies ran wildly, a shower of deadly boulders narrowly missing them. When the last boulder crashed, it blocked the way back down the tunnel. Listen, something's behind there, Steph whispered, pointing to a small circular boulder. Maybe it's the way out, Andy suggested hopefully. Kids struggled unsuccessfully to move the rock. Finally, Brand pushed the others aside. Flexing his muscles, he grabbed the boulder and pulled. Brand grunted, pulled again, and nudged the boulder out of the place. The passageway was cleared. The Goonies poked their heads into the pitch-dark opening. Hello? Hello? Anybody home? Brand asked. The answer to Brand's call was a screech and a whistle from a black-winged creature with sharp teeth and blood-red eyes. Bats! Run! Screaming and waving their arms, the Goonies fled. Hundreds of the leather-winged mammals burst from the darkness. Like a black cloud of locusts, the bats flew through the passageway. The Goonies were engulfed in darkness. Tears streamed down Chunk's pudgy cheeks. Mama gave Chunk's fat double chin a squeeze. Hard. Look, kid, I still ain't heard what I want. Now where are your friends? Mama asked. I told you, in the fireplace. They took out the logs, then the grating, crawled into some secret passageway. Mama turned to Francis. Hit puree. Francis hit the button and the blender started with a deadly whir. Mama looked at Chunk. Now, do I get the truth, or do you get juiced? Fireplace, please believe me, Chunk sputtered, deathly afraid. Just then, a loud noise came from the fireplace. The logs seemed to explode. The grating popped. Bats shot into the room and clustered in the shadows near the ceiling. The kid wasn't lying, muttered, peering into the passageway. Mama cocked a pistol. If we find those kids, no witnesses. Mama pointed her gun at Chunk's forehead. Chunk, tied to the chair, trembled uncontrollably. Maybe I'd better keep him alive just in case he's lying, Mama said. Jake, put him in with your brother. Jake lifted Chunk and the chair. The balloon fell from Chunk's pocket onto the floor. Mama grabbed the gold coin. What's this, a Cracker Jack prize? We found that with the map. It's got something to do with the buried treasure, Chunk answered. Mama was still puzzled. She handed the balloon to Francis. You're supposed to be an expert. Oh my God. Whatever Francis knew still remained a puzzle to Mama and Jake. Now the passageway became extremely small and tight, and everyone was forced to crawl. The lantern flickered. Brand complained, Hey, we're losing juice, and where are we going? This place is getting awful small. Mikey whispered to Andy, Oh, he's getting that elevator look in his eyes. Mikey recalled the time that Brand lost control after being stuck in an elevator for 5 hours. He freaked out, started spinning in circles like a breakdancer on fast forward. I can't breathe, Brand screamed. I'm choking. Mikey gave Brand a whiff of his asthma spray, which seemed to calm him. Fortunately, the passageway widened and everyone could walk standing straight up. We found it, Mikey shouted. Mikey fell to his knees near a pool of ankle-deep water. The pool was filled with coins. Encouraged, Brand sat at the side of the pool, taking deep breaths. Mikey picked up a coin. The others joined him in filling their pockets with money. Everyone seemed happy. But Steph interrupted the joyous activity. Wait a minute. These are not old coins. We must be at the bottom of a wishing well. All of a sudden, something splashed into the pool. Data fished it out and held the glittering silver coin up to the light. I wonder who's got the cash for making dollar wishes, he asked. The answer to Data's question was high above the Goonies' heads. Troy Perkins sat with his friends, guzzling beer and tossing coins. Data threw the coin back out of the well and hit Troy square on the head. Hey, who's down there? Troy shouted. The Goonies cheered from the bottom of the well. Throw us a line, help, we're down here. Troy looked at his friends and shouted back into the well. Andy, is that your voice I hear? Andy answered immediately. Troy, I'm stuck down here. Send down the bucket and rope. Please save me. Troy lowered the bucket. While everyone else waited excitedly for the rescue, Mikey stood alone, studying the medallion and the map. I know I can beat you. This is just another one of your tricks, right? Eyed Willie. Jake and Francis carried Chunk to their brother's cell and put his chair directly beside Sloth. Sloth sat in the front of the TV, his face a few inches from the screen. Chunk, nervous and unable to see Sloth's face, introduced himself. How you doing? My name's Lawrence. Everyone calls me Chunk. Guess that's because I eat too much Twinkie juice. Sloth turned from the TV screen and emitted a low, terrifying growl. His face was monstrous. One eye sat in the middle of his cheek. His wide nose seemed to stretch across his face. His teeth were crooked and yellow, his lips thick and dripping with saliva. Chunk screamed. He was trapped. Sloth gave a high-pitched giggle. Found a friend. Andy put her foot into the bucket Troy sent. Andy, wait. We still have a chance, he shouted. Of dying, Andy snapped, tightening her hold on the rope. Goonies never say die, he shouted. I'm not a Goonie, Andy said pathetically. Right, like he said sadly. I forgot. He continued talking to the rest of his friends. Guys, don't you understand? The next time you see this guy, it'll be over another town. Next time you see this, other moms and dads want the best for us. They gotta do what's good for them. Because it's our time now. Down here it's our time. That's all over the minute we ride up Troy's bucket. Everyone listened to Mikey's plea. They were interested. Troy shouted from above, Andy, coming or not? The Goonies fell silent. They stared at Andy. She hesitated. When the bucket reached the top of the well, it was filled with rocks. In the cavern, Andy solemnly raised her right hand to take the secret Goonie oath. Andy repeated every word Mikey said. I will never betray my Goondock friends. We will stick together until the whole world ends. Through heaven and hell and nuclear war, good pals like us will stick like tar. In the city or the country, or the forest or the boonies, I am proudly declared one of the— Leech! Screamed. Andy looked down and shrieked. Hundreds of slimy black bloodsuckers covered her arm. As everyone discovered their limbs were also covered leeches, the underground cavern was filled with screams of terror. Chunk and Sloth, their mouths watering, sat together watching a chocolate cake commercial on TV. Chocolate, chocolate, Sloth grunted, smiling at Chunk. Chunk smiled back, for they shared a common love. Chunk remembered something in his pocket and strained against their bonds. After a moment, he produced a chocolate bar. Sloth beamed, Baby Ruth. Chunk tried to toss a candy bar to Sloth, but the treat landed between them. Sloth growled angrily. She pulled at his chains, but he couldn't reach the candy. Chunk watched frightened. Sloth jerked harder and harder at the chains. Suddenly, the wall surrounding the chain's bolts began to crack and crumble. Sloth roared, and the bolts burst out of the wall. Sloth's legs were free. Jeez, Chunk gasped. You're even hungrier than me. Sloth then began to strain ferociously against his arm chains. Deep in the cavern, the Goonies were in a frenzy. Andy tried to shake the leeches from her arms and fingers. Bran tried to yank off the bloodsuckers. Mike even tried to dance the leeches off, but it was all hopeless. The leeches were stuck like glue. Data thought fast. He opened his yellow vinyl blanket, removed a 20-volt battery, connected with some wires, and waded into the pool. A low-voltage shock surged through his body, and Lee just fell off electrocuted. Data happily notioned the others into the water. At last, one of his gadgets worked. Fratellis trudged through the underground passageway. They came upon a skeleton. Everything clicked for Francis. "This is Chester Copperpot," he explained to Mama. He went looking for the missing treasure of William P. Portobello, better known as One-Eyed Willie. Mama, holding up the balloon, asked, "That's where this is from." Francis nodded. One-Eyed Willie was one of the most ingenious pirates of the 16th century. The guy started out as a court jester. It was banished from 5 Spanish courts because of his practical jokes. Jake grabbed the coin from Mama. He stayed behind examining the balloon as Mama and Francis walked on. So, Francis continued his story, Willie formed this pirate band, and they set sail on his ship Inferno. Willie and his men marauded hundreds of the king's ships. They accumulated a treasure worth millions. Legend has it that while being attacked by 3 of the king's ships, Willie steered his stricken ship into the hidden underground cavern, which the British sealed with their cannon fire. Willie and the other survivors spent the next couple of years hiding out, trying to repair the Inferno. They built a bunch of underground caves loaded with all kinds of weird booby traps to protect the treasure. One of his men escaped to tell Willie's story. Francis paused and shrugged his shoulders, and that's been the local legend around here for a couple of 100 years. Suddenly, there was a very loud bang. Jake jumped, then began to run. Again a bang, and again. Jake fired his pistol. Mama and Francis ducked for cover. Up ahead, the Goonies froze in their tracks as they heard the banging behind them in the passageway. "What's that?" asked Bran, panicking. "What was that sound?" "My booby caps," Data said triumphantly. He held them up. "I put these on the ground so we can hear if somebody's following us." The kids glanced at each other nervously. Then Steph screamed, "That means somebody's following us." They took off down the passageway as fast as they could run. The dust settled. Mama examined the floor. She picked up a row of caps from beneath Jake's shoe. Immediately she slapped Jake on the head. "What's your problem?" Mama said angrily. "Run your gun over a bunch of kitty caps." The Goonies ran on, Data leading the way with a flare. The kids rounded a corner and found themselves in a dead end. Suddenly the flare went out. Data grabbed for another, but it was too late. Brand was already panicking. "Great," he said, breathing heavily. "A dead end. Now what? Huh?" "We go back the same way we came in," replied Andy calmly. Mikey checked the map, looking puzzled. He began talking to himself. "It's gotta go on," he muttered. "Right, One-Eyed Willie? Wouldn't end it here. You always got something up your sleeve." Meanwhile, Brand was growing more and more frightened. "I can't breathe," he exclaimed. "It's too small in here. You guys are using up all the air. Too small." At that moment, Mikey found a Spanish phrase written on the map at the point marking the dead, and the Goonies stood in. He pointed it out excitedly to Mouth. "Copper bones, triple stones, westward foams." Mouth translated the Spanish for Mikey. Mikey held up the medallion. "Here's copper bones," he said, but the rest of the riddle puzzled him. Moss-covered walls surrounded them. Brand was still out of control. He shouted, "I can't breathe. You guys sucked all the air. You sucked it all. Let me out!" He ripped at the mossy walls with his hands, exposing the stone wall beneath. All the Goonies helped calm him. When the crisis passed, Mikey noticed stone pegs jutting from the wall, which Brand had stripped completely bare. Triple stones, he muttered to himself. Mikey took the 3-hole medallion and tried to fit it over 3 of the jutting pegs. At first nothing fit. Goonies who watched him thought he was wasting his time. Mouth said, "He's flipped, just like his brother, all going batty, one by..." Finally, Mikey made a perfect fit over the pegs. "Westward foams," Mikey whispered. "Shaving foam?" they suggested. "Foam on the ocean," Steph shouted. Mikey nodded. "Ocean's to the west." Now Mikey knew what to do. He turned the medallion to the west. A loud creaking sound foamed. The Goonies were puzzled. The Goonies were puzzled. They all waited to see what would happen next. All of a sudden, a cannonball flew out of a secret compartment in the wall. It rolled down a special path, and a trapdoor flew open. Data, who was standing near the door, flew through the narrow chute, gaining speed as he hurtled downward. Data's screams pierced the air. Then they stopped. Goonies were frightened. They gathered around the hole and peered inside, but they could see nothing, only blackness. Brand called, "Data? Data?" Still no answer. Mouse screamed, "Data! Data!" And they said it in a then it said in a whisper, "I could have grabbed him. I was this close." Brand said quietly, "It's really gone." Everyone sobbed. Mikey cried uncontrolled. Brand went to comfort him. Mikey wept. "I'm going to miss the way he used to shout out the names of all those goofy inventions of his. Glasses of death, bully blinder, smoke screen. Pinchers of peril," a voice echoed from below. "Data! Data!" Everyone rejoiced. "Okay. Pinchers of peril. I'm saved by my pinchers of peril. Guys, I found another hole, a lit tunnel." Sloth and Chunk happily shared the baby root. The candy was finished. Sloth lifted Chunk up, chair and all, and planted a gentle kiss on his forehead as an expression of friendship. Chunk made a face. "Yuck, you smell like P.E." Angry Sloth dropped Chunk's chair to the floor, smashing it to pieces. Now Chunk was free of the chains. Sloth pulled Chunk toward the kitchen. He ran to the freezer and removed a thick, frozen T-bone steak. Sloth crunched noisily on the frozen meat, and when he offered a bite to Chunk, the answer was, "You keep it. I like mine less crunchy." While Sloth ate, Chunk looked around. He spotted a telephone and dialed. "Hello, Sheriff? I'm at the old Lighthouse Lounge. Well, I'd like to report it. First, there's a murder. Actually, 2 murders. Plus, we found the hideout of those Fratelli people. Then—" "Wait a minute," the sheriff said. "Is this you again, Lawrence?" "Sheriff, this time I'm telling the truth," Chunk answered. "When are you going to stop?" the sheriff asked. "Do I have to call your mother again?" "Honest, Sheriff, you gotta believe me," Chunk begged. "Wait, hold on. Get back here." While Chunk talked, Sloth was busy ripping apart a turkey. One of the drumsticks flew out of Sloth's hand and bounced into the fireplace. Sloth ran to retrieve it. Chunk tried to prevent him from entering the fireplace passageway, but it was no use. Sloth was already on his way. 3 tunnels of mystery, all lead to unknown. To travel correctly, tickle the funny bone. Once again, Mouth translated from Mikey. He stood in a circular chamber. A skeleton dressed in a pirate's costume hung suspended in the middle of the room. Was this One-Eyed Willie? 3 tunnels led off in different directions from the sides of the room. The kids were puzzled, confused. Which tunnel should they follow? Was there a funny bone? Mouth tickled behind the skeleton's elbow. Almost immediately, another skeleton shot out of the caves. As it whizzed by, it almost chopped off the heads of at least 3 Goonies. Then Steph reached out and tickled the dangling skeleton. Abruptly, the skeleton's bones creaked. One arm rose and the fingers pointed to the 3rd tunnel. Steph smiled. "Door 3 it is. Let's move." When the others began to move through door 3, Mikey got a sudden idea. He covered his right eye with his hand and stared at the skeleton's finger. He moved his hand and covered his eyes again. Finally he spoke. "So One-Eyed Willie only had one eye, right? And if you only have one eye, well, you sort of see things in a different way." Mikey covered one eye to show the others what he meant. Imitating Mikey, everyone could discover the skeleton was pointing to the middle tunnel. Middle tunnel led the Goonies to a cave, the walls of which were lined with countless living starfish. A long, crooked mast stretched across a deep stream of rushing water. The mast led directly to the mouth of a skull-shaped opening in the opposite wall. For the first time, the Goonies finally realized the magic of the adventure. Andy whispered to Brand, "Hold my hand. I gotta be sure this is real." The sound of exploding caps warned everybody someone or something was not too far behind. "Let's move," Data whispered. The Goonies jumped onto the mast and carefully made their way toward the opening. Old mast creaked and groaned. A voice echoed through the caves. "Ooh, boy." Jerk alert. Mouth shouted. The group stopped and turned. Having made it halfway along the mast, the Fratelli stood at the edge of the subterranean stream. Mama pointed her gun. Not one more step, she threatened. Kids exchanged glances and, ignoring the warning, ran further along the mast toward the cave. Mama fired several shots. One bullet zipped by Mikey's head, just missing him. Mama and her boys leaped onto the mast. Data turned, seeing the Fratellis advancing, pulled a cord inside his shirt. Slick shoes, he shouted. Plastic tubes popped out of Data's shoes and sprayed black oil, splattered down the mast. Mama slipped, tumbling back onto Jake and Francis. Fratellis were temporarily grounded. To move on, play the tune, as each note is said. There are too many mistakes, he will surely be dead. Goonies' way was blocked by a giant boulder. Beside the boulder was a pipe organ, human bones. In order for the Goonies to move ahead, someone had to play a tune on the organ. No one except Andy knew how to read music. She sat down. Goonies' fate was in her hands. If she played the correct notes, the boulder would open inch by inch. If she played the wrong ones, the floor would give way, and all the Goonies would fall to their deaths. Andy played, note after note. Some were melodic, and some were sour. The boulder was slowly creaking open, but the floor was also crumbling underfoot. We're all going to die, shouted. The Fratellis are coming, Data screamed. Don't mess up another note, Rand pleaded. Just play, Data said. Annie closed her eyes and hit a note. The melodic note echoed, and the boulder moved away, just enough for the Goonies to squeeze through. Goonies escaped into a steep, long, circular water slide. They ducked and dodged various jutting rocks and stalactites as they slid to the bottom, screaming. A stream of water gushed out, and along with it came Brand, Mikey, and Data. Seconds later, Mouth, Steph, and Andy flew out, also ejected from the mouth of the passageway. Everyone was speechless. They were in an enchanted, magical place, an enormous underground cavern, and the most amazing sight in the place was an authentic, well-preserved pirate ship. The Goonies climbed aboard. First they explored the top deck, then moved below. Mikey noticed something important in the ceiling, a small yellow glow shining through the dust. Yellow stuff, he said. Everyone exchanged hopeful glances, for they were sure they had found gold. Hey, wait a minute, Mikey said, pointing to a Spanish riddle carved into a beam. Mouth translated. The intruders beware, crushing death and grief, soaked with blood of the trespassing thief. Data immediately said, That's the first riddle, from the attic. Mikey stood on a bench and excitedly yanked a loose board until it snapped. A glaring shaft of light shone through the rectangular hole. The ship creaked and shuddered. Mikey beamed as the others anxiously yanked away at the boards, weakening the ceiling. The golden light glowed brighter. Finally, a section of ceiling gave way, tumbling down to reveal a shower of radiance. The Goonies climbed into the brilliance and entered a magical room, a garden of jewels. The skeleton of One-Eyed Willie sat at the head of a wooden table, which was piled high with a feast of jewels. Mikey approached the pirate with respect and admiration. I'm Mikey Walsh, he said. These are my friends, and expecting us. Mikey smiled. Sitting in front of Willie, ancient version of an asthma spray device. Curious, Mikey lifted One-Eyed Willie's eye patch. There was no sock beneath, only solid skull. One-Eyed Willie, you're the first Goonie, Mikey said. Goonies ecstatically stuffed their clothing with treasure. Andy and Steph tried on rings and necklaces. Data coronated himself with an enormous crown. Mikey filled his marble bag. Mouth gathered jewels, working his way towards a small pile in front of One-Eyed Willie. Mikey stopped Mouth. That's his. Don't mess with it. Those creeps are still coming after us, Steph reminded everyone. What are we going to do? He asked. Mikey suggested a plan. We can leave a trail of this stuff, leading to one of those skeleton caves. Mikey was interrupted by the sound of Mama's voice. That's a good plan. A real good plan. Kids turned and found themselves face to face with Mama, Jake, and Francis. Data cried out, "This is war. We will not be taken alive." He opened his shirt, pulled a cord, and screamed, "Intimidator." Data began to expand and grow bigger. He was getting bigger and bigger, bigger, until he screamed, "Optional bully buster." Tellys watched Data's body literally explode with junk, plastic projectiles, ball bearings, and bottle rockets, firecrackers, but nothing seemed to work except a suction cup projectile, which flew out and attached itself to Mama's gun. The projectile started a chain of events, and Mama and Data collided in a shower of sparks. Mama passed out, and the Goonies ran out of the room. Kids raced to the top deck. The Fratelli brothers and a fully revived Mama were in close pursuit. Fratellis, bigger and faster, managed to surround the kids and capture them. Mama demanded their treasure. Kids obeyed. Rubies, diamonds, emeralds, and pearls rolled out onto the deck, a perfect feast for the greedy Mama Fratelli. Jake and Francis tied up the kids. Mama walked to a wooden plank built onto the ship's edge. "Want to play pirate? We'll play," she sneered. Mama pushed out the plank so that it extended far over the ship's edge. When she finished, she looked at the Goonies over, one by one, then planted herself in front of Andy. "Gross old witch," Andy screamed, kicking Mama in the shins. Mama, her eyes glowing with rage, growled, "Move it, sweetie." Mama forced Andy onto the plank while the other Goonies watched in horror. "Hold your breath," Mama said as she jabbed her with the sword. Andy fell off the plank, hitting the water below with a loud splash. "No!" Brand cried. He dashed forward and, without thinking, dove into the water to rescue her. Both Brand and Andy were out of sight. Mama gave a vicious smile. "Two down. Who's next?" At the bottom of the deep pool, Andy struggled, hands tied, cheeks puffed with air. Brand floated toward her, struggling desperately against his bonds. He managed to free himself from the rope binding his wrists. He swam to Andy's limp body and cradled her in his arms, kicking powerfully toward the surface. Above, Mama forced Mouth and Seth to the end of the plank at sword point. She pushed them into the icy water. All of a sudden, a scream pierced the air. Sloth, dressed in a pirate clothing, swung dramatically from a rope high on the ship's mast, a curved sword strapped to his waist. With surprising grace, he swooped down and scooped up Steph in Mouth and placed him gently on the deck. Everyone's attention focused on Sloth and his incredibly muscular body. "Get him," Mama rasped. Jake and Francis charged, swinging their swords. Sloth ducked their weapons and lifted Francis, launching him through the air. The gangster crashed through the head of a wooden mermaid and was knocked unconscious. Jake battled Sloth. Chunk snuck on board and untied the remaining Goonies. Seeing an opportunity to put his gadgetry to work, Data joined the battle. "Pincher's apparel," he shouted, firing his clapping teeth. "Come on, jump," Brand shouted from the water. The Goonies dove in, leaving Mama behind to face a growling Sloth. Mama waved a sword and cooed, "I know I treated you bad, keeping you locked in that room, but it was for your own good." Sloth walked toward his mother and disarmed her. He picked her up, fully prepared to throw her over. "No, wait," Mama shouted. She began to sing, "Rock by baby, the treetop. When the wind blows, the cradle will rock." The song brought a pleasant smile to Sloth's face. He gently rocked Mama in his arms. She continued, "When the bow breaks, the cradle will fall." Sloth grinned, then dropped Mama overboard. As she fell, she sang, "And down will come baby, cradle and all." The Goonies, followed by Sloth, swam safely ashore. Mama climbed back on the pirate ship to claim the treasure. The Tellys, after the disturbing pile of gems in front of One-Eyed Willie, found themselves on a rumbling, shaking ship, and the Goonies found themselves trapped in a rumbling, shaking passageway. "Data, need light," Brand screamed. Data reached into his pocket and grabbed what he thought was a road flare. Data lit the stick and it sparked, illuminating the passageway. The Goonies looked around and realized there was no way out. Data noticed something about the flare. "Hey," he shouted, "this isn't a road flare. It's dynamite." Data picked up the stick and ran crazily about, trying to find a place to ditch it. He saw a crack in the wall and shoved the dynamite in. Everybody ran for cover. Boom! 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 When the Goonies opened their eyes and looked through the smoke, they saw that the dynamite had blown a large hole in the wall, an opening, an exit to the outside world. The Goonies gulped, the fresh ocean air. They were scratched, bruised, and covered with mud, but they were no longer just kids from the Goondocks. A crowd rushed from the road to meet the young heroes. Police cars and ambulances waited on the sidelines. Brand and Mikey were hugged first by their mother and then their father. The other Goonies hugged each other and their own worried parents. Then Brand turned to Andy. "So, what's it gonna be? Part-time or full-time Goonie?" Andy grinned. "Lifetime Goonie," she replied. All of a sudden, Sloth lumbered out of the ocean, dragging the waterlogged Mama, Jake, and Francis with him. Police quickly took the Fratellis into custody. Sloth gave a happy grunt. He was glad to see Chunk, who gave him a slice of pizza. At that moment, Troy and his father pulled up to the beach. Mr. Perkins couldn't wait a second longer to complete his big deal. He strode over to Mikey's father. "I've come for the papers. I expect everything is in order." Mr. Walsh sighed. "Sorry, Dad. We had our hands on the future, but we threw it away to save our lives." "You're back," said Mr. Walsh, "and that makes us the richest people in Astoria." Mr. Perkins snorted. "You're looking at the richest person in Astoria. Now sign here." But before Mr. Walsh could sign, Rosalita began shouting in Spanish. She'd been folding Mikey's wet clothes and had found his marble bag. Mouth listened to Rosalita and translated. Don't sign." Mr. Walsh hesitated, puzzled. Goonies pressed close to see. Rosalita opened her hands. The gems sparkled in the sunlight. And suddenly, the Goonies were surrounded by the press. Every newspaper reporter in Astoria had rushed to the beach to scoop a story. They gaped at the jewels and asked the Goonies a million questions. "Hey, look," someone shouted. Everyone turned toward the ocean. They were met with a wondrous sight. The pirate ship sailed majestically across the sea with the skeleton of One-Eyed Willie in command. The Goonies jumped up the rocks to see better. As they watched, Mikey's eyes filled with tears. "Bye, One-Eyed Willie. Thanks." The Goonies had won. The Goondocks would live forever.